All right, welcome to the week 3 general meeting. Thank you so much for coming out today. I know a lot of you guys have midterms, so we really appreciate you guys taking time out of your day to come today. And, oh, sorry, I didn't even introduce myself. Hi, my name is Dana, and I will be presenting along with Ryan and Tiffany today.
Hello, everyone. Here are your steps to becoming a PPS paid member. Step 1 is to complete the PPS membership Google form. This link can be found on this presentation and in the weekly email. Step 2 is to turn in the membership payment to our treasurer, Andrew, via Venmo at pps@uci. It will be $20 for winter and spring quarters. Step 3 is to email our internal vice president, Ali, to pick up your club t-shirt or have it shipped to you. And step 4 is to keep track of your your stamp count on our virtual stamp sheet. This link can also be found on this presentation and in the paid member emails. Forms and payments are accepted throughout the quarter, but I highly recommend becoming a paid member as soon as possible so you can start receiving the benefits that come with it, such as the weekly emails with job or research opportunities created by our lovely secretary, Chantel.
All right, so the PTCB question of the week is: a prescription was faxed in for Tylenol number 3 with a SIG of 1 tab PO QH PRN PA, and the label should read either A, take 1 tablet by mouth every 6 hours as needed for pain, B, take 1 tablet by mouth every 6 hours until gone, C, take 2 tablets by mouth daily as needed for pain, or D, take 1 tablet by mouth every 6 hours and every night at bedtime. So I will now release the poll. If you guys want to vote on that, I'll give you guys around like half a minute. Okay, alrighty. I think that is almost everyone. Let me share the results. So yes, the majority of everyone got the answer correct. It is take 1 tablet by mouth every 6 hours as needed for pain. So these SIG codes are what prescribers use when they write a prescription, and one of the many jobs of a pharmacy technician is to translate these SIGs. So for instance, in this SIG, I don't know why this slide is different. Let me go back to the other one. So the SIG that says 1 tab, which is 1 tablet, PO stands for by mouth, Q6H is every 6 hours, PRN is as needed, and PA is pain. So good job, everyone. And next we're going to start with recap. So thank you everyone who came to the general meeting last week. We hope you had a lot of fun at the social and you were able to make a lot of new friends.
So thank you everyone. Huge thank you for everyone who attended PPD. I mean, at this time we are still able to host a PPD with such a large event is absolutely amazing, and we hope everyone learn more about each pharmacy school programs and get to interact with the reps real well.
And another upcoming we have is the after social, which will take place after this general meeting. We are going to be watching some episodes of Friends on Discord. So stay after the meeting if you're interested in doing so.
An upcoming event we have is Chapman University Virtual Visit. This event will be taking place this Saturday from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. on Zoom. It's a great opportunity to learn about Chapman University's PharmD program and talk with their current students. If you're interested, please fill out this Google form found on the email by tonight before 11:59 p.m. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please contact our IVP Ali at her email on the slide. And that's it. Thank you.
Another upcoming event we have is our Week 4 general meeting, which will be next Wednesday, January 27th from 6 to 7 p.m. It's going to be on the very same Zoom link as we are now. And for this meeting, we are going to have some people from UCI's alumni chapter of Anteaters in Pharmacy who will be presenting about the Anteater Network. And this is a great way for students to receive mentorship from past UCI students. So if you're interested in attending, very same Zoom link as I said before, and paid members will receive a stamp for attending. If you have any questions about this meeting, please contact me at my email right there.
A volunteering opportunity we have had is Free Rice. Free Rice is a website or downloadable app used to donate money to the World Food Program, or WFP. All you have to do is answer trivia questions, and this earns you rice grains that translates to currency for the WFP. This is a really great way to help support the WFP and their efforts in donating where needs are the greatest, such as food, education, and emergency services. You can go on this app to raise rice grains anytime, but if you're interested in helping out, please fill out this Google form by tonight before 11:59 p.m. You can join the PPS team by this code on the slide to help us reach our quarterly goals. There has been a change in the free rice amount. So now for every question you answer, you get 1 grain of rice. If you are a paid member, you can receive a stamp every 1,000 grains. And if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please contact our president, Jenny, at her email on the slide. Thank you.
Another volunteer opportunity is Step Up Tutoring. So Step Up Tutoring is basically providing free online tutoring and emotional support for students, probably high school and middle school. I think it's K to 12, amidst to the COVID-19 pandemic. So you can go sign up in the link below. And also, why would you want to join that is you can help foster educational growth in elementary school students from Los Angeles Unified School District. And you have a minimum commitment of 2 hours per week for 10 weeks and no experience required. So this is such a great opportunity to gain some teaching experience. So if you're interested, paid members will receive a stamp for attending and complete this form by tonight at Wednesday, January 20th by 11:59. So if you have any questions, comments, and concerns, please feel free to contact our president, Jenny Nguyen, at her email. Now, we have our new episode of the podcast the first one for this quarter. So for this particular episode, we have Dr. Amanda Tran. Many of you guys may be familiar with her if you came to the KGI virtual visit during the fall. Dr. Tran, who graduated from UCI in 2012, established her interest in science and her passion in serving the community since high school. During her years as a UCI undergrad, she strived to find many opportunities and provide us around to continue to help the people in need, such as experience such as being a log tutor. So with such vision of what kind of pharmacist she wants to become in following her passion, so she decided to focus her practice on ambulatory care and academia at the same time during her time as a pharmacy student at UCSF and her residencies. So if you want to go ahead and check more out about her journey, you can go to our 8 major podcast platforms and listen to it. Thank you.
We would love to stay connected with you through our many platforms. We have a Facebook, Instagram, Discord, and website. We also have a Zoom study room, which is open 24/7. And finally, you can help contribute to our Spotify playlist and bond with one another over music. All these links can be found at the bottom of our weekly emails.
So please welcome our president, Jenny Nguyen, for her presentation on letters of recommendation.
Hello. All right, I'm going to share my screen. Ooh. Can the host please let me share? Thank you.
Sorry, you should be able to now.
Got it, thank you. All right, can everyone see? Yes.
We can see.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I feel like one of those professors where they're like, I can't see you. Okay, so today I'm going to be presenting about letters of recommendation. I do have some experience of it because I asked for some myself. This is something that I'm really excited to present about just because it is a very interesting process. I think a lot of people get really nervous about it, me including, so I'll try my best to help you all. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask. We should have some time at the end if I time myself well, and you can ask your questions then. But before I dive too deep into it, I just want to say that I apologize if my Wi-Fi cuts out. I have very bad connection, but if it does, I will be back as soon as I can. Okay. All right, so here is the pharmacy school application process pretty vaguely. So the first step is PharmCast. PharmCast is the centralized application where they can take all your information that you put in, so like transcripts, personal essays, any experiences that you have, and then they send it to the schools that you choose to apply to. So for example, if you want to apply to Western, KGI, UCI, you would just indicate that on PharmCast, and then they would take the information that you put in there and send it to all of them after you make your payment, of course. And then next is the supplemental application. This is something that varies from school to school. Some schools actually don't have a supplemental application anymore. They've kind of stepped back from the supplemental application and just put those questions that they might have had onto PharmCast to make it easier for applicants. But still, this is really important for you to look at when you're looking at the schools that you're applying to, because I have a friend that like applied to a school, but they didn't know they had a supplemental application, so they didn't receive an interview. But luckily, when they reached out asking like, why didn't I get an interview? They're like, oh yeah, you didn't do the supplemental application. So they were flexible with them and let them submit the application, and then they got an interview, but just definitely keep that in mind when you are applying. Next is the actual interview. So hopefully after you submit your applications, they take time to review your application and grant you an interview. And lastly, you could get an acceptance, hopefully. And this should be about 2 weeks after your interview happens. So there are typically 3 letters of recommendation required for pharmacy schools. This can vary, of course, along with everything else, but typically they want a science professor, a pharmacist or healthcare professional, and someone who knows you professionally. So this could just be like a previous employer or even a current one, someone who could just speak about your skills and how you work. Some notes that I want to mention is that not all schools require 3 letters or these specific ones. Some schools have recently changed to only 2 letters. And some actually don't specifically say they want these 3. They might just say they want 3 in general. So that may be helpful for some people if you don't have all of these 3 specific people to write you letters. Also, most schools don't allow letters from clergy, family, or friends, and PharmCast only allows a maximum of 4 letters. So if you are just making those connections and talking to all these people and you have so many people that you can ask for a letter, definitely try to narrow it down to like 3 or 4 people that can write you the best letter. So you won't be wasting anyone's time since they only accept 4. So schools require letters of recommendation just so that they can hear from someone else that you are the person you say you are. You can say like in your personal essay what you are, like what you like to do, what kind of person you are, maybe your skills, your strengths, and all that stuff. But it's different hearing it from someone else. And if someone else can support that with detail and maybe some examples, that makes a huge difference. They want to see that you have the intelligence, stamina, and drive to succeed in their program, and also learn more about your personality, which you can't really see through your grades or just listing out your experiences and stuff like that. Admission committees expect to see the validity of your claims, specific qualifications, unique traits that aren't covered in the application, how accurately you evaluate others, and also the commitment that you've put into learning more about the field that you're interested in. This is pretty straightforward, but something that is pretty interesting is number 4, whether you can accurately evaluate others. I think this is pretty interesting because, for example, if you ask someone for a letter, but they end up saying in the letter like, oh yeah, this student did really well in my class, but I actually don't know much about them, that would prove that you cannot really accurately evaluate others. So definitely put some time and thought into who you decide to ask, and hopefully they can do a good job writing your letter, but I know sometimes it is hard to make those connections with people. So if you can't, then that's perfectly fine, but just do your best. There are 3 important features in a letter of recommendation. This applies to all of the letter writers. So like, for example, the professor, the healthcare professional, and the employer or someone that can just speak about you professionally. So they should be able to speak on your intellectual ability. Right off the bat, this kind of sounds like something that only a professor would be able to write about. But if you look at the parentheses, like they can also talk about your skills in learning and your interest in the subject, which you can get from your other letter writers, like perhaps your pharmacist, if they see that you're passionate about the field. Second, your personality traits. This is something that may be a bit harder when it comes to professors because you may feel like you're just a student in their class and you want to be professional with them, but it depends on the professor, honestly. But if you have the chance, definitely try to talk to them, get to know them. It is a bit awkward, to be honest. Like it is awkward on Zoom, especially because you kind of feel like you're just there for office hours, and once you're done, you kind of just leave. But if they do seem willing to stick around, definitely hang out, maybe just like have some downtime, talk about anything that interests you, maybe even the news, something like that. Third is supporting details. So I briefly mentioned this, but they can say a lot of things about you, but having supporting detail and examples makes a big difference in a letter of recommendation because it just shows that you are hopefully the person that they describe or you describe. Who should you ask for a letter? I think this is probably what was most difficult for me. I was fortunate enough to have people in mind when I was picking a letter or picking people to write my letters, but not when it came to like a professor or something. So this can be very difficult, but that's why we encourage students to start early or applicants to start early because we want you to be able to have someone when it comes to this time so it's not as stressful. So you want someone that can write you a strong letter of recommendation, someone who has a personal relationship with you and can talk about your character, performance, and also how your skills and personality can translate into you being a pharmacist in the future. You should ask for a letter of recommendation early. I typically say at least 3 months before PharmCast opens in July, but soon I'll talk about when I actually did ask and have it due for them. You should create a personal deadline for when you want them to finish their letter. So for example, I asked in April, which is 4 months before PharmCast opens, if I can count. And I gave them the deadline of August 1st. Maybe that's 3 months. I don't know. But I asked them in April and then I gave them the deadline of August 1st because I knew I wanted to apply around that time. I didn't have it due for them once PharmCast opens on July 14th because I knew that I would take some time anyway to fill out the application and I didn't really want to rush them. But I indicated to them that I wanted it to be due at this time because I was applying to schools that were on a rolling admission basis. And if they are rolling admissions, they are taking interviews and applicants on a rolling basis. So the sooner you submit, the better you have a chance of getting an interview. So I expressed that it was important that I have it done by this time. And luckily, I didn't have any problems. All of them submitted it early. So yeah, definitely ask early. How should you ask? So I typically suggest for people to ask in person. It's just more intimate, more personal. Like even now you can see that our interactions through Zoom is not exactly the same as it is in person. We're missing an aspect of it. So that's why I suggest it. And then after that, if you can't, like right now, you wouldn't be able to, you could give them a phone call or email them. I did this because when I asked in spring quarter, I believe we were quarantining. We were just not in person at that time. So I did have to email 2 of my letter writers, but they were perfectly fine with it. And I asked my pharmacist in person since I do go in person to work. And next, you can ask for a strong and positive letter of recommendation. And if they say that they cannot provide that for you, then maybe you can ask someone else if you have anyone else you could ask. And I put stars next to these because not all writers may agree with this. For the first point, some people don't actually prefer in person over email. They say like it's the same to them. They don't care how you ask them. But also something to consider about asking in person is that if you do, they may feel a sort of pressure to say yes. And so if that's the case, if you do want to avoid that, you could email them or just let them know like, oh, please take your time to think about this. I don't want you to feel pressured. So that's how you can go around that. And then the second point about asking for a strong and positive letter, I asked one of my writers to give me tips that I could give to you all, and he said that he doesn't like it when people ask for a strong letter. And I'll go more into detail about that at the end when I talk about tips, but that's just something to keep in mind. It varies from person to person. And lastly, if the person says yes, you can give them the letter of recommendation packet, which I will go over right now. Okay, so a letter of recommendation packet is something that you can give to your writer after they say, yes, I will write the letter for you. And this is mainly just to help them along the process. It has a bunch of stuff in it. It's very detailed. And although it is detailed, it is concise as well. So they don't have to like go out of their way to look up the deadlines and stuff like that. And you can also give them some tips in here as well. So here are the things that I included in my letter of recommendation packet: a picture and a blurb, important dates and deadlines, an application cycle, the timeline of it, tips for evaluators, FarmCast Likert criteria, which is what they will be judging you based off of, and I'll show a slide of that later, letter of recommendation structure, personal essay, resume, and a thank you letter. The thank you letter is something that you may be doing throughout the whole process. Like if they say, yes, I'll write the letter, you can thank them and such. But the handwritten thank you letter itself, I would suggest for the end, maybe after they submit it. Okay, so out of those things that I listed on the previous slide, I'm going to be showing examples for these 5 things. So the important dates and deadlines, the application cycle, to-do list for the evaluators, FarmCast criteria, and the structure. So if you do want to make your own packet, you can refer to these slides and then just copy the information on it. Okay, so first is the important dates and deadlines. As you can see, I listed when FarmCast opens, and I showed them an example of what they should expect, just so they know. I don't want it to get lost in their emails or anything. And actually, you may want to also note that it may be in their spam, or if they don't say that they received it, then you can tell them to check their spam, because I know one of my writers actually said it was in her spam for some reason. But yeah, that's something to keep in mind. Definitely follow up to see if they received the email. If not, it could be in their spam, or maybe you sent it to the wrong email or something else happened. And then I also put August 1st, which was my personal deadline of when I want the letter of recommendation due for them, when they should submit it on FarmCast. This is the application cycle. It's very similar to the previous slide because it shows when FarmCast opens and such, but also includes when I will be submitting, when I'm expecting interviews, and when I should get acceptances or rejections from the schools I applied to. I think this is pretty helpful for them, just so they can kind of know and like await an email from you. If you do get into schools, they'll expect it during this time. Next, we have evaluators. So they have to submit evaluations to FarmCast, and it's through their own private portal. So they send them an email and show them all the instructions, but it's nice to lay it out for them in advance so they know. When you ask them for the letter of recommendation, it will probably be, well, it depends when you ask, but it could be before FarmCast opens, and at that point, they may not really have any information about it, so it's nice for you to provide that for them. Part 1 is to complete the questions and evaluation ratings through the evaluator portal, and I'll show that in the next few slides. And then next is to just upload the letter of recommendation, which, you know, it's the letter itself, that's what they write about you. And here are just some tips, the accepted formats, just so they don't save it under something that isn't accepted, and it just saves them time. Okay, so this is the Likert criteria that I was talking about. So these are all the things that they will be evaluating you on. So there's oral communication, written communication, leadership, ethics, empathy, reliability, judgment, interpersonal relations, adaptability, and professional appearance. As you can see, there's a bunch of things here. It's just something to kind of keep at the back of your head when you are interacting with these people. For example, like maybe if you go to see them, don't wear like, I don't know, your pajamas when you see them, so that you don't get a bad score or whatever for professional experience, professional appearance. But yeah, this is what they see when they are ranking you. And I believe it might be on a scale of 1 to 5 or something like that. And this is just a sample letter of recommendation structure. I'm not sure if my letter writers really used it because they have a bunch of experience with writing letters, they have a lot of people that ask them to write them a letter. But just in case they don't have experience, this is something that would be really helpful. So in the introduction, they could just talk about who they are, their qualifications. In the body, they could talk about how they know you, their relationship with you, and how you demonstrate your skills, maybe what skills you do have. So for example, if I'm a pharmacy technician and I ask my pharmacist to write me a letter, he could talk about maybe if I have empathy when I speak to patients, or how I communicate with my coworkers and other patients, maybe the doctors when I call them, stuff like that. Next is how the applicant translates into being a future pharmacist. So this is kind of like what I was saying earlier, just like the person you are and how your skills make you a good future pharmacist. And then areas for future growth and weakness. And lastly, in the conclusion, they can include if they recommend the applicant, if they recommend you, hopefully they do, if they're writing you the letter, and also any contact information so that they can be contacted if the schools have any questions about their letter or about the applicant themselves. Okay, so here are the FarmCast logistics. I would send the request email as soon as FarmCast becomes available, just so they have the information as soon as possible. And well, actually, you should send the request email as soon as FarmCast becomes available after you've already asked them. Like, don't send it without asking them, but definitely ask them first and then send it as soon as possible. And if you need it, there is a resend reminder option. Luckily, I didn't have to use this, but if you do have to use it, I believe it just sends them another email and says, hey, you have to write this letter. So that could be pretty useful. Next is that FarmCast only accepts electronic letters submitted through their portal. So if anyone is lacking experience or you don't think they've written a lot of letters of recommendation before, definitely let them know that it has to be an electronic letter. They can't just like write it or print it out and then mail it. It has to be electronically. And also you have to waive the right to see your letter. So when you request, you have the option to waive your right, and you should definitely do that so that they feel comfortable writing your letter and they're not like, oh, this student is going to see my letter, so I should write something different. You should definitely waive your right just to respect what they have to say about you. Also, something else to note about this is that you can submit your FarmCast before the letters are done, but I personally didn't, just because everyone had it done on time and I figured the school wouldn't look at my application without the letters anyway, so I just waited for the letters to come in before I submitted. Okay, so after the letters are submitted, definitely write them a thank you card. Whether you get in or you don't get in, it's very important that you thank them for it, because they did take a lot of time out of their busy lives to write it for you. I suggest handwritten, but of course it may be difficult at times. Like now, you may want to send an e-card if you want, or maybe just a thank you email. I personally wrote it out. I drew my handwritten card out and then I sent it to them as an image. I don't know, but I thought it was cute. And then you can also give them a personal gift. This is a bit difficult right now because you don't want to ask them for their address or anything. I just gave them a gift card to a place that I know they like, and I think that was fine. They appreciated it very much. And then also keep them updated. You should let them know where you get interviews, where you get accepted, and lastly, where you decide to attend. I think whenever I tell my letter writers, oh, I got in here, they're very excited for me. And I think that's definitely a part of them writing the letter for you. You don't want to just leave them hanging. They're gonna just wonder, like, whatever happened to you, where'd you go, you know? And lastly, here are some helpful tips from my letter writers and also from applicants. I asked them for this because I thought it would be helpful to you all. So first, from my letter writers, I asked my professor and my employer. So not my pharmacist, but someone else I work for. And this is what they said. The first person I asked said that if a student has not worked closely with someone for 6 months, it's not reasonable to expect a good letter. You can still get one, but you can't expect it. And I get what this person is saying, but it's really up to your discretion. Like if you really work closely with someone and you've built a relationship with them, it might be perfectly fine. So it's totally up to you. My professor that I asked is just very strict sometimes, but to be honest, I don't know if I worked with him for 6 months and he was happy to write my letter. So it just depends. And then they also said to be genuine and sincere. This person doesn't particularly like it when the requester kind of flatters them in a way, like compliments them. They just feel like it's a bit ingenuine. But again, this just depends on the person. Some people may not care at all, but this professor I asked just doesn't really appreciate it. And then next is asking specifically for a strong letter. So I have a professor that says, yes, that's a good idea. And then my other professor says, no, he doesn't like that. So it depends on the person you ask. Hopefully you know them well enough to know if they can write you a strong letter or not. But it is up to you. Personally, I don't believe I asked for a strong letter just because I knew that they were totally willing to write me one. But if you feel like it's necessary, it's been suggested by a lot of people. So don't hesitate if that's what you feel is right. And next, someone told me that the letter of recommendation packets are helpful. So that's really great to hear. You put in a lot of hard work for this thick packet that you send them, and it's great that they are able to gain something from it. It's very organized, and it has all the dates for them. So they don't really have to look anything up. They don't really have to wonder too much. But if they do have questions, they can definitely ask you. So I would definitely indicate that to them. And lastly, my letter writer said that it's okay to ask professors to write you a letter after the class ends rather than applying. So just an example of this is just if, for example, I'm in my second year and I take class with some Bio 97 professor and I really like them, we get along so well, and I think they could write a great letter for me, it's okay for me to ask them at the end of class, like, hey, can you write me a letter when I choose to apply? And they may be totally happy to do it. And if they know that you do want a letter, they may take notes about it so that when the time comes, they still have those notes to refer to so that they can write you a good letter. Because if it's like, like a year and a half later after you take the class, they may not really remember who you are. So it may not be as strong of a letter if they do decide to write you one. So that's something to keep in mind. Okay, and moving on to applicants, I asked a few of my friends and they said to start early, which is highly suggested by me as well. You should definitely start early. You want to give them an ample amount of time because they are very busy and a lot of them have a lot of other requests. So the fact that you can ask them early shows that you are responsible and you're kind of planning ahead of time, which is really important. And next, you can give your writers at least 3 months. This is kind of referring to starting early, but actually starting early could also refer to writing your personal essay early, because if you want to include your personal essay in your letter of recommendation packet, you should start on that before you plan on asking. So for example, for me, I worked on my personal essay like very briefly, to be honest, before spring break. And once spring break came, I really focused on it. And because it was a break, I felt like I could really invest a lot more time into my personal essay. I asked people to proofread it for me. Even my professor wanted to, and he gave me some very constructive criticism to improve my essay, but it was very helpful. And once spring break is over, you can ask your letter writers for a letter of recommendation, which is around April. So I think that'd be a really good schedule or timeline to follow. But of course, we do recommend for people to start their personal essay early just because it can take a long time. And if you ever have an important moment in your life, like before you apply and you feel like this really has a big effect on why I want to pursue pharmacy or the pharmacist I want to be, definitely take note of it because that's something that you can come back to when you actually do decide to write your personal essay. And like all the memories are still there if you take note of it. Next is make it easier for them, tell them what to expect. So this is also referring to the packet. If you give them all the information, it's easier for them so they don't have to go out of their way or just wonder like when they're going to get an email or wonder what the next step is. And then you should also get to know them, talk about your future goals. This goes back to office hours. I think this is a good time, at least for professors. Also, if you maybe research with them or help them with their classes. Personally, I was able to help my professor with like 3 of his classes. So we were able to communicate a lot throughout that time. And in regard to pharmacists, I feel like when they interview you, they do learn a lot about you, but throughout the time you work with them, hopefully they'll learn more about you, and same with your other employer that you might ask a letter from. And then follow up with them, which I mentioned earlier, update them with everything that goes on. But also if you are waiting for a letter from them, don't hesitate to like ask them. Maybe if they're late, don't be afraid to ask them. Or if it's like a week before it's due and they haven't like mentioned anything about it, I would definitely reach out to them. And lastly, make a timeline to stay on track. This is definitely a good thing, a good suggestion to follow. I did this for myself. I kind of just laid out everything I wanted to do in this time frame for my whole pharmacy school application process, actually. And then I just looked at each month and made sure that I had everything done by that time. So I think that is all I have. Thank you all for listening to my presentation. We do have time for questions, I believe, so please don't hesitate to ask.
Hello, Jenny.
Hi.
Hey, I was just wondering, what are some good options you could think of in your head for the third choice, for not the third choice, the third recommendation letter writer?
So like not the professor or healthcare professional? Is that what you're?
Sorry, I can't hear you.
So not the professor or the healthcare professional,
Yes,
right?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
I asked one of my employers. So I work as a PAA. So I asked the department. I know a friend that tutors, and she asked the people that employ her, I guess, or her boss. Or if another person I know participates in volunteers for Karate for All, if you know about that, and you can ask the person that helps you with that. I think that's a really good option, to be honest, because it shows a lot about the person you are. It's not just like how you are professionally, but also the fact that you're willing to put out your time to volunteer. So yeah, if you volunteer somewhere, that's a good option as well.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I have a question if we have time.
Mm-hmm.
Since it seems like we are going to be online for a while, how would you recommend going about emailing like professors or employers about, or not employers because obviously you see them in person, but like professors about asking for a letter of rec?
I think you could just, if you're just wondering like how you can ask them for a letter, I would just find like, or not find, but create a template maybe just to talk about maybe how you know them, your relationship with them, why you think their feedback about the person you are is valuable. Oh, sorry, I was just checking the chat. You can definitely talk about maybe what your goals are in the future. I believe I talked about what schools I want to apply to, briefly about why I want to pursue pharmacy, how much time they would have, just some basic information. And then if they are willing to, then I sent them more information through the letter of recommendation packet. Yeah, I think it depends on your letter writer. If you are very close to them, it can be very simple. But if you aren't as close, I would maybe format something like more professional. But of course, it depends on you. Hopefully that helps. Does that help?
Yeah, that did. Thank you.
Okay.
Hello. I was wondering, like, how would you know if, like, you're the person you ask? The person you ask for a letter of recommendation, like, if they think fondly of you, or like they really like you and they will write a good recommendation of you, or they might just say, "Oh, I don't recommend this person."
That's a really good question. Have I felt that? I think I did feel that a little bit for my pharmacist, just because I may not think too fondly of him, but I think he was very willing to write one for me. But it truly does depend. I know that for him, our relationship is very weird, but when I asked him, I could tell that he was super willing to. But something else to keep in mind is that it doesn't hurt for you to ask. And hopefully they'll be honest if they really don't want to write the letter for you. But yeah, I hope that they can ask, or they can write one for you. But let me think about. For my experiences, I feel like I was lucky with the people that I asked, just because they're very expressive and appreciative. So through the way that they interact with me, I knew that they would be totally fine with writing one for me. what are you talking about, Ryan? But yeah, they were very appreciative in general whenever we communicate, whenever I work for them or do something for them. And I feel like this goes back to kind of point number 4, like I was saying a while ago about how you can evaluate what others think of you. Hopefully through those interactions you can kind of get a feeling, but I know like it's different for everyone, so it doesn't hurt to ask if you really truly do not know. But yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Hello, Jenny.
Hello.
So I was just wondering something. So say that you asked a professor that you had like in the first few years of like going at being at UCI, so like your second year or something, for a letter of rec, and they agree to it. If like the person is asking for a letter of rec, are we supposed to sustain a relationship with that professor in order for them to actually pull up with the letter of recommendation and then make sure that they make it as good as we would like it to be in order for that letter of recommendation to be applicable?
Yeah, that's a good question. I definitely should have mentioned that. You should definitely keep in contact with the people that you want to write you a letter. So for example, like you were saying, like first or second year, they say they'll write a letter for you and the time goes on. You should definitely keep in contact with them. Maybe ask them how they're doing, if they need any help with their classes or whatever they're involved in. You can just tell them that you're available to help them. It just shows that you are willing to help and not just like asking them for a letter and then like never talking to them again. I think that makes a huge difference just to know. And if you do ever have like meetings with them for whatever reason, like if you are helping them with the class, you'll end up probably talking about where you are in the process or how you're doing, and then they'll be able to gain more information about you in order to put more stuff into your letter.
Thank you very much, Jenny.
Mm-hmm.
Hello, Jenny.
Hello.
So I wanted to add on to Rosanna's question a little bit. Well, it's kind of like a half a question. So basically, do you want to really be like very, very firm if you ask the professor early about having like asking them you want a recommendation letter, but then just to make sure that when you're actually applying, you actually needed that letter from that particular professor? Like, let's just say that like if you have problem, like if like there's mutual agreement that the professor is going to write a recommendation letter to you, then later in your college career you find a better professor that can write a better professional letter of you, and that would just be awkward, right? I know.
I think it depends on the professor and how you ask them in the first place. I think that if they offer you, for example, if they just say, oh, if you ever need a letter, like I would be able to write one for you, that sounds very casual. So in that case, you may not have to feel that pressure. But if, for example, you ask, actually, I think when you ask, maybe you should say, oh, if I need a letter in the future, would you be willing to write me one? Just so it's not like, can you write my letter for me in 3 years or something like that? You
know what? That's smart. I'll write that down.
Any other questions or about my experience or pharmacy school applications? We will have a presentation about pharmacy school application process next quarter, by the way.
I do have another question if no one else has one. So like I'm a transfer student, so I went to community college for a while. Mm-hmm. Do you think it's better for me to like ask professors that I've been with at UCI, or would it be just like equally as valuable to ask professors from my community college who I might have a closer relationship with, just because they were like much smaller class sizes than compared to UCs?
That's a good question. I personally think that it doesn't matter where you ask from as long as they can speak well about you. I know my sister, she took some classes at a community college and she also went to UC's, and she asked her community college professors because she felt like because it was a lot smaller class, she was able to really get to know the professor better, and she just felt like they had a better relationship overall. And I know like she told me that the professor was really kind with them and apparently wrote her a good letter. So yeah, I'd say it totally depends on the person, what they can say about you or how much they like you more than like where they go or the setting.
Right. So essentially it's about like who you feel can write a better recommendation for you and speak better to your person.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And you guys can also type your questions into the chat and I can read them out if you guys want. But if no one has any questions right now, Jenny, I have one. So if your writer submits their letter of recommendation, is there like a waiting period where FarmCast has to evaluate it, or is it considered submitted right when they send it in?
I believe right when they send it in, it is submitted. Yeah. There's like 3 stages. I don't exactly remember them. I think it's like requested, like opened and verified or something like that. So I think once they submit it, then it should be ready to go. Yeah, I don't believe FarmCast takes a look at it. I think they just send it over to the school.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Also, I have a really quick question, Jenny.
Mm-hmm.
So what if they don't send you like a good letter? It was like a bad one.
Like, what would you do, or what would happen?
Like, you know how like on the like there's like a timeline for like what they should write, like a prompt kind of. What if in the end, like the conclusion, it was like, we don't recommend this student?
Unfortunately, you wouldn't know if they wrote that or not. Yeah, because you do waive your right so that you can't see it. If they write that they don't recommend you, hopefully like they wouldn't say they would write you a letter in the first place, but only your school would see that. Technically, you wouldn't see it. So
I see. Okay. Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome.
I have a question about like letter writers.
Mm-hmm.
I was wondering, so I'm doing research and I'm doing direct research under a grad student. Could they possibly like write one of my letters because I don't work directly with the PI?
That's a good question. I think that because most schools don't require strictly professor, pharmacist, or healthcare professional, and what was the other one? Just like another employer of yours, I think it should be okay. But if they specifically say professor, I think that is a difference. If anything, it doesn't hurt to clarify. I feel like the admissions people are very friendly, so you could definitely ask them to confirm. But if they don't specify, then it should definitely be okay.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, Jenny. I have one final question.
Hello.
Yes, I would kind of like to go back to your statement of, the aha moment that kind of reconciled your desire to pursue pharmacy. And I was wondering what was kind of that moment that fostered your passion for pharmacy?
That's a good question. And that's something I really, really thought about when I was writing my personal essay. And I was really stressed about it, to be honest, because I feel like a lot of people kind of speak about this moment where they realize like pharmacy is for them and they want to do it for the rest of their lives. And I was really stressed because I didn't have that moment. But I spoke with someone, I think when I was like fundraising chair for PPS, I was meeting with my president at the time, and I was just talking to him about my life. And I was like, man, I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't have like this sign that tells me I want to pursue pharmacy or whatever. And he's someone that I really trust. And he's a great applicant. So what he told me was just that like you don't have to have the same experience that everyone else has, and it's totally fine if you decide over like multiple experiences that you want to pursue pharmacy. So for me, a big part of it was just through PPS, I learned so much about pharmacy, and like I feel like every meeting I went to in PPS taught me something new that I could do. And I think that made a huge difference because whenever I would go to a meeting, I'd think like, oh, maybe this is what I want to do. And then next meeting, someone else presents about something and I'd be like, oh, maybe this is what I want to do. And through my other experiences, like as a pharm tech, I think also it's okay for you to experience something and realize this is not what I want to do. So that's a little bit how I feel working at my pharmacy. But like, for example, over the weekend, I helped prepare vaccinations. at the vaccine point of distribution at UCI, and I talked to some pharmacists that work at UCI Medical Center, and they talked about like how they do this pretty often because they work with IVs and stuff. And I think that really helped me like kind of realize that there's so many more things I can do, and I'm interested in a lot of things. So I think it's just like a compilation of experiences, and I think that's totally fine.
Thank you so much, Jenny.
Mm-hmm.
I have another question.
Mm-hmm.
What was like the hardest part about applying to pharmacy school? And do you have like any tips that you haven't mentioned yet for future applicants?
Yeah, I would say the hardest part for me was letters of recommendation. This is something that I was super nervous about just because I was just thinking like I don't have a professor to ask, because to be honest, I didn't go to office hours because I was like very nervous. I was scared that they were going to ask me questions and I didn't study before I went to office hours or something like that. But I was very fortunate to have met a professor that I just got along with really well. We met before I took him as a professor, and we were just it was just very easy to speak with him. And so when I did take him as a professor, I went to office hours. And luckily for me, it just built up upon that. He asked me to help him with classes and such. So that made my experience a lot better. But I would say letter of recommendation is very scary for a lot of people, including myself. Tips I have is just to start early. I know a lot of people say that the application process is very stressful for them, maybe because they start a bit later or something like that. But honestly, if you start early, I think it helps so much. I started in July when it opened. I submitted my application in August. I interviewed maybe week 1 of fall quarter. So that's before everything started getting crazy with my classes. So that helped a bunch. So yeah, I'd say starting early makes a huge difference.
Sorry, I have another question.
Mhm.
I was wondering, like, if you're applying to pharmacy schools, how many would you like kind of suggest to apply to? Because I know that many people don't want to get inundated with like interviews like all on the same week. So I was wondering, like, is there maybe a range of like the number of pharmacy schools to apply to?
That's a really good question. I know a lot of people that apply to like, well, I was talking to someone earlier actually, and they were saying they applied to like 7 pharmacy schools and they had like 7 interviews in the past 2 weeks. So I definitely suggest spacing it out. I know someone that did do that and they said like, yeah, I wished I spaced it out. So if you do choose to apply to a lot, definitely do that. For me, I only applied to 2 just because I kind of had an idea of where I do want to be. And also, I don't know if I should suggest this, but if worse comes to worse, like different schools have different application deadlines. So if, for example, I applied to UCSD and they don't accept me and I applied early, I still have time to apply for other schools. So it's not like if they don't accept me, it's over. Like I have other options. Like for example, if I wanted to apply to UCI after that, I could, because I believe their deadline isn't until like April or something. So it's not like the end of the world if you don't get into a school, especially if you apply early, you have many other chances to apply just because the deadlines range. But yeah, I think it has a lot to do with how picky you are, or maybe if you have a dream school, you may just apply there. But I do know someone that applied to 7 and had 7 interviews. So it's totally up to you. But definitely space them out if you can. If you do choose to space them out, I suggest applying to the ones with rolling admissions first, just because of what I said earlier. And if it's non-rolling, they kind of just look at all the applicants at the same time. So as long as you do it before the deadline, then you'll be considered with everyone else that applied, even if it was super early. So rolling first and then non-rolling after.
Okay, thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
I was wondering, how did you narrow it down to just applying to 2 pharmacy schools? There's just so many pharmacy schools, like in-state, out-of-state. I don't know how you got like to such a clear decision to only apply to 2.
That's a really good question too. To be honest, before I applied, I had no idea where I wanted to go. It was only until like maybe when I started asking for my letter of recommendation or my letters of recommendation from my writers, I thought to myself, like, I really should say like where I'm interested in. So I took more time to actually think about what's important to me, because I feel like up until that point, I was like, yeah, I could go here. Yeah, I could go here. I like this school because of this. I like this school because of this. But I further thought about it and I realized like being at least moderately close to home is very important to me. So for example, like Roseman, I really love them. Like their faculty is great, their admissions team is great, everything about them is great. But for me, I wanted to be closer to home. So unfortunately, that wasn't an option for me because of that very important factor. So I was sad about that, but I realized like even if I did get in and I really love them, like it's important for me to be close to my mom at home. So I think thinking about what really matters to me makes a big difference. Also, the more I thought about what I want, the harder it was to find a school that actually fit what I wanted. So I think that might help, just really thinking about it deeper. If you want a 3-year program, a 4-year program, maybe if it's pass no pass grading scale or just like a normal grading scale, team-based learning, class size. Some people really like the small class size because it's more intimate. Yeah, just a lot to think about. And frankly, when I asked for my letter writers, I said, I'm applying to these 4 schools. And then I ended up only applying to 2 of them because I realized more about what I want. So it's okay if you are still learning along the way. You have time.
Thank you so much. I think we have time for one more question, if anyone has one.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi, Jenny.
Hello. I saw your question, but I didn't have time to read it. I apologize.
It's okay. Yeah. So I just may ask you, like, if for some reason you just got like experience with pharmacists or healthcare, like only like less than 6 months before you apply to pharmacy school, do you think like I should turn on to like should wait a gap year or like beside like pharmacist? Can I just like have another professor or like to do that like letter of recommendation for me, because like before I go to pharmacist I already talked about 2 of professor that I can go to and 1 of my employee. Is that an okay option, or is definitely I need to have a pharmacist or healthcare professional to write me a letter of recommendation?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I would say it definitely depends on the school and what they require again. So if they do require like a pharmacist, then definitely you should ask your pharmacist. But if they are super flexible, like I think it should be totally fine to ask your professors and like whoever else you said. But something else about the 6 months thing is that, like I mentioned earlier, it does depend on how much you work with them. Like if you work with them and you can tell they really get along with you and they have a lot of experiences with you that they can speak upon, I think it's totally fine for you to ask them. But ultimately, it depends on the person. 6 months is kind of just like something you can base off of if you really don't think that you have that great of a relationship with them. But if you work for 6 months, even if you don't interact all that much, they should know some stuff about you and how you work. But like I said, I think for one of my writers, I did not know them or work with them closely for at least 6 months. So it just depends. Yeah, but I think it's fine if you ask your professors instead if the school doesn't specify.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you everyone for such great questions, and thank you so much for coming today. And can we get a round of applause for Jenny, please? It was a really great presentation. You did really good, Jenny.
Thank you.
And yeah, with that being said, it is 7. So if you have some free time and you want to chill with us a little longer, we are going to be hopping on Discord for after social to watch a couple episodes of Friends. The link is in the chat if you guys want to hop on there. Yeah, thank you so much for coming, you guys.
Thank you, everybody.